Welcome to the Daily Devotional Podcast with author, pastor, and speaker Zach Maldonado, a podcast about helping you know and enjoy Christ each day.
Every single one of us, to some extent, is probably kind of maybe addicted to approval. We all want people to like us. We want to be the most popular. We want to be the most liked. We want people to accept us and like us. And if you're like me, you want to please people. You want to make people laugh. You want to earn people's respect. You want people to like you. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. God has created within us all a desire to be accepted. Many of us think that we must be approved by others. So here's the lie. We think we must be approved by others in order to feel good about ourselves. But that's a lie. And really, it's a trap because there can never be enough approval from other people. There can never be enough praise. There can never be enough success. There can never be enough acceptance from other people to really make us feel good forever. It fades. Haven't you noticed that? That every single morning you wake up and you go, and whether you're going to school or you're going to work or you're just going to parent your kids at home or whatever the case may be, whether it's with your spouse or with a friend, most of us were constantly on this path of trying to get people to like us. And aren't you exhausted? And I think the reason for most of us is we think if others will like us, then one, we'll like ourselves. But then if others like us, then we can finally feel good. But it's never enough. And the good news is this. Romans 15:7 says that God, Christ, has accepted you. Romans 15:7, Christ has unequivocally and unconditionally accepted you. There's no doubt. There's no room for doubt because the cross and the resurrection completely shout that God accepts you. He approves you. He loves everything about you. There's nothing he dislikes. There's nothing you can do to change God's opinion of you. I love another verse. It's found in Galatians chapter 2, verse 21. And it says that if righteousness were through the law, were through rule keeping, were through doing good things, if righteousness were through the law, then Christ died for no purpose. Before that, he says, I do not nullify the grace of God. What does that mean? Well, in order to celebrate God's grace, the way to not do that is to try to earn it, is to try to work for it. The way to celebrate his grace is to receive it as a gift freely. You're like, Zach, you don't know my past. Well, God does, and he says, I accept you. Zach, you don't know what I've done this week. Well, God does, and he says, in Christ, you're accepted. And that there's nothing you and I could do, whether it's keeping God's laws, whether it's obeying perfectly or being perfectly faithful, there was nothing we could do, because we can never do those things, in order to make ourselves right with God. Instead, it says, if there were something we could do, Christ died for no purpose. Think about it. If you could make yourself acceptable to God, if you could make yourself okay with God, if you could make yourself right with God, then why did Christ die? We couldn't. That's the whole point. Christ did for us what we could never do on our own. Now, here's where this works out in real life. There was this experiment done a number of years ago by a bunch of psychologists, and it was called the scar experiment. And they put these realistic scars on these people, and they took them and they said, okay, we're going to drop you off at a mall, and you're going to see how people react to you. So they showed them it, and right before they sent them out, they said, hey, we got to do some last minute touch-ups. And what they did was they cleared off the scar without the people knowing it. And so the people went out into the mall, and they all came back with the same response. People judged me. People hated me. People looked at me weird. And what's the point? The point is that oftentimes we are defining ourselves by something that isn't there, that isn't true. We're defining ourselves by scars or by past or by our shame that's actually been removed. You see, when we see ourselves in a negative way, we think other people see ourselves that way. When we see the scar, we think other people, when we believe there's a scar, when we believe something's wrong, we think other people think the same. And what God is saying is, will you recognize that you're a masterpiece? Will you recognize that the scar has been removed? Will you recognize that there's no flaw in you? Will you recognize that you're my masterpiece, that I handpicked you, that I created you, that I designed you, that you're a work of art, that you are amazing, that you are wonderfully and beautifully made? And so many of us fear rejection. I don't know about you, but growing up, I've got a lazy eye. And I remember in 5th grade getting picked on for it by a bunch of guys older than me. And thankfully, my brother was there to kind of stand up for me. But I still get insecure about that. And we wear these labels. Maybe it's weird. Maybe it's dumb. Maybe we think we're fat. Maybe we think we're stupid. Whatever labels we've been given. And the first thing we see in the morning are those labels. And God is saying, will you recognize that you're righteous? Will you recognize that you're a masterpiece? Let me remove those labels. And as a children's book once said, the labels don't matter when you understand what God says about you. The labels don't stick when you recognize they don't matter anymore because you're a child of God. You're holy and righteous. You're no longer defined by what other people say about you. You're no longer defined by what you do. You're no longer defined by what you've done. You are defined by Jesus and Him alone, and He lives in you. He lives in you. He really does, and He accepts you, and He loves you. And many of you struggle with negative thinking. And the way with that is God is inviting us, will you come each day? And will you let me constantly renew your mind with the truth of my word? Renew your mind with the fact that you're beloved, that you're righteous, that you're okay, and that you're accepted. We don't have to fear rejection when we know we're accepted. We don't have to try to get approval from others when we know we're approved by God. We don't have to go on this performance treadmill. We can step off and we can relax in God's arms because He's got us and He accepts us forever.
You've been listening to the Daily Devotional Podcast with Zach Maldonado. Join us each day for a new devotional that will help you know and enjoy Christ. For more great content from Zach, including his books, sermons, and more, check out zachmaldonado.com.